Hello, everyone. Hello. How we doing? How y'all doing? Oh, I know, it's weird to see me in big screen. You're probably thinking, what the hell, Peralta? What's going on? You're usually over here like this. Except I hit the wrong thing. Except, you know, oh, no, I hit the right thing. I thought I hit the wrong thing, but I didn't. I hit the right thing. I'm still on the right thing. Peralta slideshow. That was indeed a Peralta slideshow. Yes. Welcome in, Gagita. Yeah, so we're going to try something a little bit different tonight to start us off. I'm wondering if this is maybe, and do you know what, actually full credit to Nate for this, by the way. Nate has started his streams of late with like questions, and they're a little bit more like about the viewer. First, fuck you, Gagita. They're a little bit more about the viewer, but I'm wondering if we do it a little bit more about gaming in general, and seeing what that kind of goes like. So Nate does prompts on stream to start himself off now at the moment, and it's kind of a really cool idea. So Nate, I spoke to Nate earlier about this to make sure it was okay, but I'm going to steal it from Nate. I'm gonna steal it from Nate. So full credit to Nate for doing this concept, but we're gonna try it. So now that I've said that numerous times, I don't have anything on screen, so maybe I could have that where I could go like bing. To be fair, he didn't ask if it was okay, he just told me he was stealing it. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So today's question for those watching on Twitch is the title of the stream currently. For those watching later, story is always bigger than gameplay. Every time. Thoughts. So I'm going to lay out my thoughts pretty eloquently. I'll try, and then you guys can jump in as we go. So I think this is true. I think this is my biggest underpinning of games. Now let's clarify first that not all games, because there's games out there that are not story based by nature. We're talking about games that typically have a story attached to them. You know, you're talking about your Witcher, you're talking about your Mass Effect, you're talking about your Dragon Age, you're talking about games that maybe are FPSs first, but they do have a story to them as well. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's kind of where I'm angling this. So, you know, stuff like Fallout counts in this as well. Stuff like Skyrim, stuff like that. All those types of games count. So anything that has a significant amount of story. So again, for example, opposite side, not talking about like something like Rivals, not talking about something like Fortnite, that sort of thing. Those obviously are primary gameplay games first. So with that said, why do I think that story is always more important than gameplay? Mass Effect is a great example. The first Mass Effect, probably one of, I actually think it's like Mass Effect 2 is really good, but I personally really feel Mass Effect 1's story is like a really nice, tight experience that you just get through, and it's like, it's got so many good parts, right? So for me, that game, when I first played it, the original version, not so much Legendary, that they changed that, of course, but the original game had an insanely good story, even though the gameplay was somewhat jank, especially the Mako, for example, right? And some people would probably say, oh, right, okay, that section put me off the game forever. I don't really get that way. If a game is annoying, I will still see it through if I think the story is good. Like, for example, right now, I'm playing God of War Ragnarok, and I'm going through the Valhalla stuff. I will go through that until I finish the story of it, because I love the God of War story and I want to see it all myself, even though I don't love the idea of doing a roguelike part for God of War. Okay, so let me just read what Nate said there. Bad gameplay can ruin good story, but no amount of good gameplay can make up for a lack of, I'm assuming you're saying lack of good story there, Nate? Story was meant to be my final word. Yeah, I agree. Bad gameplay can ruin good story, but no amount of good gameplay can make up for. Yeah, that's actually very valid. So one example of that is Avengers, so Marvel's Avengers. So Marvel's Avengers started off with a strong intro story, and it had good gameplay to go alongside, and I enjoyed that first month of Avengers. And don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed the game after the fact, but what I think was fundamentally a problem for me was that I'm also going to turn this music down a little bit more, just so I can hear myself think. What fundamentally ruined it for me was when they started doing the updates thereafter for the patches. Because when they did that, the story got lesser and lesser to a point where the story was basically like art at the beginning of the update. And Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League did the same thing. They just, as soon as they did the first update outside of the main game, the quality nosedived story-wise. And so even if they had a good gameplay loop, which Avengers, I have to say, the gameplay loop was actually very fun. It was a little bit repetitive, but the way they built those characters out felt so they fulfilled the hero fantasy so well. Yeah, so that's my example of that, where it was sort of, in my head, it was good story and okay gameplay, above par gameplay, and then the story just nosedived, and because the story nosedived, I just checked out. I wasn't interested anymore. But a good story can make you weather it anyways. A Fade sequence of Dragon Age Origins, that's another good example. Yeah, the Fade part of Dragon Age Origins, if I could skip that every time, I would, but it wouldn't stop me playing the game. I would push through it every single time because the other parts of the story are so good, right? The Fade part of that game was ass. It was. Hello, Finn. Welcome in, by the way. So we're talking about gameplay versus story. That's the topic of today. It is. So do we have any opposite examples? Has there been any other examples in the... Does anyone have any opposite examples? A good story will look at you playing a game. No amount of gameplay can make me play more. Yeah. There's never been a game where I've like been like, oh, this gameplay is so good that I'm gonna like, even though the story's boring. I actually played a game not long ago, and I don't remember how good the combat was actually, but it was okay. It was standard. Well, there's two actually. There was Atlas Fallen or something, and there was another one. I can't remember its name, but it was on Game Pass, and I didn't. The gameplay cycle was okay, and the story was really subpar, and I couldn't get through them. Okay, so I do want to mention this. How about a series with a long-standing story where one entry advances the gameplay elements so far, but the story suffers in comparison? I have a few examples. Go ahead. So what you're saying is, are you, for example, like, let's use the opposite, Insomniac Spider-Man 2? Well, personally, I didn't mind the Spider-Man 2 story, but I will say, actually, you're somewhat right there in that the gameplay elements of that really stepped up a notch where the story didn't, but I still enjoyed it. And I think some of that, Spider-Man's very unique, actually. Spider-Man is actually very unique, and the reason Spider-Man's unique is because when you become Spider-Man in a game and you're swinging around the city, and that's gameplay, right? But you feel almost like that story. And I know that sounds stupid to say, but it's the hero fantasy, right? The hero fantasy steps in as part of that, right? You're swinging around the city, you're fighting crime. That is part of the story. Does that make sense? So I think what the gameplay does there is advance the story to in a way that actually continues to make you feel. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Hero kink. Oh no, I'm just Spider-Man 2 has started popping up on my YouTube again. Well, do you know what? I actually will give a good example of one where I think gameplay had me a little bit more interested than the story. And I would say, actually, I mean, to be fair, it's a fighting game, so it sort of doesn't count. And also, we're going to change music a little bit because this is winding me up now. Okay. I will say that I actually think one that did that was Injustice 2. I actually relatively enjoyed the gameplay of just Injustice 2, and I enjoy like the dialogues between characters and stuff, but the story was relatively forgettable. I've played the full game and I don't remember the story at all. So maybe there's some. I'm saving my points for a shelf tour. That'd be cool, Jaybird. My god, the designs in Injustice 2 still haunt me. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect game, but do you think you could agree with what I'm saying though, right? That it was a relatively fun game from a fighting game standpoint, but the story of it, which it did have a significant story, was not good, but I still wanted to play it because it was fun to beat them up as heroes. So if the realm need to stop writing stories, I swear. I've missed a few examples here, but I think Nate was talking about Halo. They made it open world, it kind of sucked so much that you stopped caring about the story. Yeah. Sometimes that can happen. My example is Yakuza 4. Go ahead, tell me about Yakuza 4. I'd love to know, considering I'm going to play it at one point probably. We'll get to that someday, but yes, go ahead. I can go over in some detail without spoiler. Yeah, go ahead. What I will say as well, actually, and what I would like to refer to as popcorn games. What I mean by popcorn games is, do you know how you go to the movies and there's a movie that you watch that's like basically a little bit of fun, but so you don't rate it as harshly as other movies? I think there's games like that as well. So there's popcorn games. What I mean by that is, you know, like Mario, for example. It's not an innovative story, but the gameplay is what keeps you coming back for those types of games. And it does have a story, let's be honest. Mario does always have a story. Or Sonic. Or... they're not really innovative. But you know what I mean? So like, I think that fits in that category. I think that's one of those games where actually Mario and Sonic and like Donkey Kong, some Nintendo games, because even Pokemon, right? Pokemon's actually a really good example. The story is typically the same formula, but I love the game. I love the Pokemon. That's the gameplay, right? So actually, Nintendo is actually a very good swap of that, right? So Nintendo does it the other way. They have somewhat fun gameplay that makes you care about the rest in a way. The big thing is, this is the first time ever that you play a character that isn't Kiryu. You get a wide variety of new protagonists with new stories and characters and gameplay that differs from the classic Dragon of Dojima style. Akiyama is all about the kicks, and his agility means that you can potentially do infinite combos. You get characters like Tenemura who focus on parrying and disarming enemies. There's more levels to Kamurocho where you can explore elements of the Skyland, Kamurocho, and the Underground, but my god, the story is a mess that falls apart so badly. I get what you're saying, Finn, because you're right in a sense. If you're able to... so like, but is that not? And let me be devil's advocate here. Let me be devil's advocate here. So if you've got a game that builds on pre-existing lore, for example, Dragon Age Veilguard was a good example of this. Maybe not the strongest story of the series. In fact, probably game 3 of 4 for me personally. But I actually really enjoyed it. But it builds on the world, and it gives you these zones that you've never been to before, but you've heard about for 10 years. What about that? You know? What about that? Because that is still storytelling in a way, because you're going to a place and you're getting the lore of a place you've not been to before. But the main story, the actual story, was good. And also, Veilguard's combat was actually very fun, even though the story was not as well baked. I actually really, and Veilguard, I will say this, Veilguard was my favorite combat system of the 4 games, sorry, but it wasn't the best story-wise. Veilguard kind of sucked on a Dragon Age game, but I enjoyed it very much while I was playing it. I agree with that, Faustus. I enjoy the game. I won't say that I didn't enjoy it, and I did enjoy a lot of the elements, but yeah. Still haven't got Veilguard, couldn't get through Inquisition, so didn't bother. That's fair, Nate. Inquisition's Inquisition was a divisive game. I think there can be expansions to a wider world that work with a story that fails as a whole. I mean, we see this with MMOs a lot, right? Also one of the most visually beautiful BioWare games. I think MA2 is also really visually nice, yes. So, Faustus and Gigita, we play FF together. And Finn, we've played SWTOR together. And I'm trying to think of other examples here, but MMOs, right? Zindello and I have played WoW together, for example. Now, those games are somewhat different, but the gameplay keeps you coming back to an MMO, even if, and sometimes it's the role player or the friends, but even if the story isn't that great. Like, I go back to WoW because I like leveling a character in WoW. So there are definitely examples that are in the opposite, right? SWTOR's story went down the pan, but I still somewhat enjoy leveling a character on SWTOR. You know, so I think MMOs are a little bit in that grey area of this as well. We see this in a certain BioWare MMO, funnily enough. Cough is a cool cough. See, I thought Zakul was at least they tried something with Zakul. You know, I had someone in my... I actually made a TikTok about Zakul, Quartet and Kotfe. If I'll call them that. It sounds weird to say. But I had someone in my comments about that because I made a video about that about 2 years ago, and someone found it recently and made a comment and said they totally ruined everything. And you know what? Props for them for saying we're no longer canon, we're going to try something. SWTOR's stories and their core characters are quite alright. I really enjoyed the warrior story. I love Darth Baris. He's such a fun, memorable character that remains at the very core of the story as a constant. That is the thing as well, right? So, MMOs especially do this, but I think a lot of games do this, is that they really manage to hit the ground running with their base story, and then everything thereafter is not bad. In fact, I actually saw a TikTok the other day, I forgot what it was about, but it was talking about the fact that when you get to a third movie, typically the third movie, so like the first movie does good, the second movie does better, and the third movie just squanders it all. And I think that's a very interesting point as well. WoW's storyline is like, what if we did Rule of Cool, but like without making it enjoyable, so it's just flashy things that it's hard to get into. That's true. I don't disagree. I think it's hard, especially because WoW's been around for so long as well. So I want to pivot to something. How do you feel about new protagonists, moving beyond a character who's a mainstay and focusing on a new character? I don't want to go too much into something else. I think what you need to do with that typically is either do what God of War Ragnarok, you have to supplant gameplay with it, right? So when God of War made Atreus the deuterogenist, is that the right word? Deuterogenist? Is that the right word? The second protagonist. Wait till you hear about movies. Don't have to deal with any deuteragonist. Guys, I'm only one man. Right, okay, right. Let me go back up. So let me just work on that. Who's a mainstay and focusing on a new character? Focusing on a new character can work if it's a game that's separate. I don't think it typically always works when you change the main franchise to be that character. I think typically a new character is either better if the main character is if it like how would I put it? I think you've got to give some time between, or like for example, Witcher 4 is coming out, right? And it's going to follow Ciri, and with Ciri you're going to have a different gameplay cycle somewhat. That'll be fun, but they give that time to breathe first. I don't know. That's my thought. Anyway, I'm going back up because guys, chat's going wild now. Halo did that a lot, and it was so fun, but so many people hate when it's not focused on the chief. It's hard. It's hard because I think sometimes you want to expand that universe out, right? And that's part of the story too. If you follow the same guy for fucking 20 years, it gets boring. When you hear about about movies, don't have to deal with any of that pesky gameplay. Now that I've read that properly, that's quite funny. Lynch is a prolific game dev. We need his opinion. I think it happens with this series, it remains on a long time. We had characters like Leon and Chris Redfield and RE being moved away, or like Dante and Nero and EMC, or yes, like the Yakuza franchise. I'm open to it, especially for those long-lived game titles, but I think it's hard to manage. Halo series struggle with that a lot, but I think the fan community can really spoil them from new story RPGs. I bet you would give a real honest opinion and no sarcasm at all. You expect no sarcasm from Lynch? Right, I don't get me wrong, I love that point, Finn, but I'm just going to kind of put us back up the story versus gameplay thing. And do you know what's an example of this that actually I've just thought of there, where I thought the gameplay was stellar and the story wasn't? And I think I think anyone who's played this will agree. Mass Effect Andromeda. I actually think, again, best gameplay of the 4 games, but the story was not as prolific, like, at all. But that gameplay I really enjoyed. Elden Ring, fun gameplay, I guess. Shit story. Well, Elden Ring's a different beast though, isn't it, Nate? Because Elden Ring tells you its story through its gameplay. So I think that's a little bit different. I think that's a hard one to kind of gauge compared to what we've talked about so far. Yeah, I don't know about that one. Elden Ring is definitely a weak entry in the Souls franchise as a whole, even lore-wise. I couldn't talk about it in depth, but I think it's a little bit of a different beast. It depends, because gameplay can sometimes be storytelling. Like Tater and I are playing Dune right now, and a lot of the storytelling is actually done through the gameplay. And what I mean by that is you're a guy that's in the desert, the sandworms are around, you're having to ration your water, you're dealing with spice, you're having to cross the desert, etc. And like that is story. So it's a hard one when gameplay becomes story, right? And some games do it flawlessly. What can we talk? I'm bonding, Jaybird, yeah, I'm bonding. Can I also give another example? Let's just avoid a story being too hype two hype moments in Aura. Yeah. Another example of the opposite, actually, and I want you guys' opinion on this. I actually really appreciate when a game that isn't meant to be story-based still includes story. The primary example is Rivals, but I know Gigita has a very soft spot for when Apex Legends did this. And, you know, Rivals having... I didn't expect story at all, right? And the fact that every season follows a progression is actually really cool, and it makes me want to play the game a little bit more, right? So this where the game... I came for the gameplay, but I'm stopping a little bit for that story, you know? Lily's opinion, they are equally important. Bad story but good gameplay, you can skip cutscenes and still enjoy games. Bad gameplay and good story, you can just watch a movie. Okay. I have a big thing with Yakuza 8 and why it's so low on my Yakuza rating. Is it because of something like this, Finn? Apex Season 5 was great. Fun story, build up clues to discover before it rolled out. I miss it. I mean, even Overwatch did it a bit, if you remember back to when they made Sombra. They did Sombra and they were trying to make it out so that she was like she was hacking the different events they were doing and stuff, and made that kind of a meta story. That was really cool. A lot of fave games I couldn't play because the gameplay is frustrating. But you know which one's actually the best example of what Nate's talking about here with Lily's opinion? The Witcher, the first Witcher. Because that game actually has a somewhat interesting storyline. If you read up on it, very interesting actually. Except for the fact that the game is one of the most jank games to ever exist now. It's just whoa, like, you know. Also, another example, we played, and maybe this is an example of cozy game. Maybe it's a different vibe there. Maybe that's where how Nintendo sort of falls into this. But Tales of the Shire, did it have an impactfully grand epic story, so to speak? No, it does have a story though. But it's about the gameplay cycle to an extent, right? It's about making your pretty house and doing your pretty things. So there's room for both, and I think, yeah, there is an importance on both. The story just tries to do too much. It's juggling way too many elements. Yakuza Like a Dragon was so masterful in storytelling because it was driven by a core character, Ichiban, who I love. But Infinite Wealth, it's just doing too much. It's like getting a bit of butter and trying to butter a whole loaf. Ooh. Lily just wants to shoot and explode things sometimes. She's more interested in good gameplay than the story, makes it more intriguing. But for example, right? Let me put something to you, right? Because let's have a look at Baldur's Gate, right? Because don't get me wrong, I think Baldur's Gate's gameplay is somewhat interesting. But if you were to say to me, play this game that has all these abilities and stuff, but there's no story, I'd be not interested at all. The thing that pulls Baldur's Gate through is the story, right? Because the gameplay system, no matter how good it is, that kind of gameplay system, it's about the choices and the branching narrative. And really the gameplay is relatively irrelevant, right? Yeah, it's fun, but it's not. It's relatively irrelevant, isn't it? That's in my opinion, at least. Lots of cozy games are story-like, but still so fun. Exactly. Like Tiny Bookshop, she was enjoying Bookship, and he said Tiny Bookshop, she was enjoying book selling, but then the little bits of story made it more appealing as she went. That's true. Although Infinite Wealth vastly improved the combat system of 7. 7's combat is good, but IW knocked it out of the park. BG3 almost has a microscopic focus on every plot line to a degree that's almost scary. But that's what I mean, right? So that's what I'm getting at. Like, the gameplay is fun, but is it comparable to the story? And if it wasn't, and if the story was not as good, would we care? And I think no. Do you know what? Another example where actually, and this is actually one where I think gameplay actually hindered the game. But the choices you make is that story or gameplay and BG. This is the thing, right? So sometimes it borders that line, right? Because arguably it is gameplay, right? The idea is they've structured their game surrounding the idea that you get all these branching paths, right? It's like a Telltale game in a way, right? A Telltale game, the gameplay is the story. Telltale is a perfect example. Do we include music as a story element? Because music can make such an impactful difference to story or a gameplay segment. I think music's separate, but I think it's relevant, if that makes sense. Visual novels and walking sims are kind of based in this sort of thing. But see how deep this conversation can actually go. And this is why I think it's so interesting. I think, you know, what constitutes gameplay? What constitutes story? You know? Can gameplay be story? Can story be gameplay? You know? For example, I'm sorry for bringing up Yakuza again, but the original versus Kiwami. Yeah, okay. Okay. For whose sake the final boss theme sounds so wildly different between the OG and Kiwami. Okay, I think a great OST can really sell a game, but some games are predicated on music, like Transistor. But Transistor uses music as part of its story, though, Gageta. And not just in the sense of making the scene more impactful, but a character within the story, right? So that's a little bit different again. It's fundamental. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The original sounds more somber, a battle that really feels like it isn't wanted, but Kiwami feels impactful, almost like a fated battle. Music could definitely change how you approach a moment, so to speak. I think you know, you can change, like if you've ever seen, I know this sounds really stupid, but this is what's coming to my head right now. If you've ever seen those Friends clips where they took the laugh track off it, and it's just incredibly awkward. So like, definitely music can change things. If you listen to like 30 seconds of both, you get what I mean, I think. I mean, I'm not going to do it currently because, you know, we're currently talking about story over gameplay. But yeah, I get what you mean, Finn. So where were we? Story over gameplay. I had one in mind and I've lost it. Claire Obscure, right? Claire Obscure is an interesting one. Music is one of the most... you guys have just took me off the track again. Music is one of the most important things in any media. Take the music out of any show, film, or game, and it will change your emotion entirely. Just when people laugh at the concept of bards. We love a bard. Bring all your bards. Bring out your bards. Claire Obscure. Claire Obscure does music really well, actually, as well, as a side point. But I will say that Claire Obscure's combat system was so intriguing because it was so different. That it did enhance the story, because it makes you know the struggle the characters are going through, because some of those fights are really hard because you have to think about them and because you're kind of struggling through them, and so it really it brings up the impact of those characters. No, that's Nate is going, Claire Obscure. That's what Nate's doing. I got it, Nate, don't worry. I got it. That was me for weeks afterwards, though, so that is relevant. But I'm sure we'll talk about music on another one of these Peralta's takes. But yeah, this one's story gameplay specific, trying as much as possible to stay on that track. Any other examples before we wrap this up? Because I think we've had a good talk. I think we've basically decided that it really does depend, which I think is always the case, right? But yeah, did you finish Baldur's Gate 3? I haven't yet. We're currently going through. I'm going to change this music again. 1 second. I have an example of music enhancing story. Okay, well, I'm sure we'll be able to talk about that in the future. But again, we're talking about story over gameplay. We're talking about story over gameplay. There's actually a gacha event that had a moment where they'd started playing a song from one of the past events, which immediately cued you into what was happening in the story. Guys, we're talking about story over gameplay. No, it's okay. It's okay. Final example, Claire Obscure. I've said that. What else? What other game does this for me? Let me think of ones we played recently. What else have we played recently? Let me think. I'm going to think if I can round this out with something interesting, some poignant note. The Mafia games are actually a good shout as well, right? So, Mafia, very high stakes story, very low stakes gameplay, right? Not really much going on there. Very rudimentary systems, but they manage within that to really make you care about the characters still, and they make you want to play more. I remember playing the first Mafia 1 and Mafia 2, but not so much 3. 3 was a little bit of a different beast. But 1 and 2, I ran through those games because of the story. I was actually very intrigued by the story. Even though the gameplay cycle was nothing interesting. So I think it really does depend. I think that's the answer. I still fundamentally believe that 90% of the time, story bigger than gameplay. I think can we sort of agree on that? I think sometimes gameplay is story, so I think that's relevant. And I think sometimes you play a game for the gameplay and it changes. But I think generally we can all agree that it's generally story over gameplay, right? Gameplay over story, I feel Mirror's Edge maybe. I love the game, but don't get me wrong, but I remember more how fun it is and story wasn't heavily involved. I can agree with that. I've played a little bit of it in the past, and I'd say so. I'm struggling to think of other examples. I think gameplay is the hook, story is the anchor. Gameplay over story, zombie games. I will say that actually, we're playing Back 4 Blood at the moment. Nate, you're actually right. Back 4 Blood has basically no story, really, apart from like the actual mission objectives. But it is fun. But this is where you get into nitty-gritty territory as well. Does playing with friends substitute good gameplay and substitute good story? Do you know what I mean? Does playing a game with friends, for example, MMO heads, if you play an MMO and it's starting to get sort of ass and your friends are still playing, you stay for your friends, right? So that really adds a third kind of thing. Does multiplayer sometimes make up for the pitfalls of an ass game? Which is a totally different topic, sort of, but I think it links. What do we think? Because I think any game that I've played with friends, I'll probably play that game regardless of whether I really even like the game sometimes. Like, when Repo came out, Nate was sort of suggesting I get it. And even though I don't really care for that sort of game, I probably would have got it and played it and probably had a little bit of a laugh. And Peak, I don't think I'd have picked up on my own, but I played it with Nate, and again, these aren't maybe story games, there's no story to them, but Peak, I played with Nate, Lily, and Ajax, and I enjoyed that, and it's not a story, again, but I'm struggling to think of examples of multiplayer for crap story games, but I don't play as many as you guys. It's almost a social element that transcends good gameplay or good story, exactly. And also, like, I don't often get to play games with people, so I can't relate. Yeah. We'll change that, Faustus. We'll change that. To watch your own adventure, maybe click a button in a certain time rather than an actual game. Yes. Well, yeah, true. That those types of games are essentially a movie, right? Do you know what? Another example, though, and Finn will agree with me here. Ghost of Tsushima. So Ghost of Tsushima, the gameplay is story. Again, going back to the main point. Because Jin Sakai is learning abilities as he goes to become the ghost. And sausage. I can't say it now. Because as he's going, he's learning these abilities, and some of these abilities are outside of his honorable style, so to speak, right? And in so doing, every time you learn an ability, the story is changing, and sometimes you take down people, like you assassinate them, and you'll get like these kind of like flashback moments, and like these kind of like almost like the error of your way moments. So I enjoy BG3 more on my own than anything. Well, yeah, but can get lost in it. But is that because to be honest, never had a strong urge to play Baldur's Gate 3 until Peralta pulled me into it. Not that it's a bad story, not in the least, but I enjoy it more because I'm playing it with others. Yeah, but that's my thing, right? So I never wanted to play Baldur's Gate on my own because I think I would have lost it. Refresh my memory, you played Dishonored, right? I played a bit of Dishonored, not the full thing. I actually struggle with playing games like Baldur's Gate or Baldur's Gate 3 or Divinity Original Sin without at least one person with me, because I feel like that was how they were somewhat intended to be played. Not that you can't play them alone, but I feel like playing them alone lessens my enjoyment. So there's definitely that element of friendship that adds to the gameplay and the story in a way. Being able to kind of see things go wrong with a friend is really fun for me. Dishonored is an interesting idea though, because I was kind of going to go there. I think something similar happens with like Dishonored as to what I was talking about with Tsushima, right? Like the ability tree, the story shifts based on gameplay choices, skills learned, like you mentioned with Ghost. Also, I didn't like the gameplay as much for 1 and 2 lol, but I love the story as much for 1 and 2. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interest. I actually really love this topic, guys. I think we've really kind of dug into it. I think what we're coming to understand is that typically story, let's put it as, let's finalize it as, and let's hope we can all agree on this. Story 60, gameplay 40. In the general sense. In the general sense. Sometimes it's 70-30, sometimes it's probably 50-50, but I think generally 60-40. It depends on the genre, yeah, but I'm talking about like very, very general, very, very broad strokes. You know, I'm talking about your most games. Of course, some games, gameplay is paramount, you know? Battlefield, for example, yes, it has somewhat of a story in that like the mission has something, but Battlefield is a gameplay game, for example. Or again, Mario, gameplay game. It's about having fun and going through the levels and shit, even though there is a story attached to it. But I think generally 60-40. I think that's where I landed it. I mean, if we're being real here, it's subjective. For me, I prefer story over gameplay. My sibling prefers gameplay over story. Of course, it's definitely subjective, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that on a whole, most games thrive better. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Whoa. Pull it all back. Marvel's Midnight Suns. That game suffered more from its gameplay than its story. And the reason it suffered from its gameplay is that they did a poor job of showing people what the actual gameplay was. Because all that people saw was cards, and they thought it was a card game. And it's so far removed from a card game. It's an XCOM game. It's a tactical game. And it was so... The gameplay so underserved that game that the story, which was quite interesting, ended up in nothing. So that was really... That one really annoyed me. Yeah, subjective, but also genre. Like I like no FPS story if I love the gameplay. I like no RPG gameplay if the story is really good. Yeah, yeah. Of course, there's definitely a lot of wiggle room here. So I think that's a really interesting point of debate, and I appreciate you guys for all tapping in on that. Thank you for your opinions. Thank you for your time. I think it's relatively equal, but it depends on genre, taste, and sometimes something else my brain forgot whilst writing this. That's fair enough. Well, I'm going with 60-40. I'm going 60-40. In fact, I'd probably go 70-30, but I don't want to get roasted alive by my community. So, yeah. Arkham games are another one. I think the gameplay of the Arkham games actually really adds to the story overall. But there you go. I can think good story is more memorable than good gameplay. I agree with that too. Yeah, I agree with that too. how a game makes you feel, but Arkham's an example because how a game makes you feel, I think, is the most important thing, whether it be gameplay or story. You guys keep pulling me back in because the Arkham games, Arkham number 1, you're in Arkham, you're in the sewers, and you're being chased by fucking Killer Croc. Oh! But I will remember it to this day. I remember playing that the first time. Oh! Is that story or gameplay though? Is it not both? This is what we keep coming back to. The Arkham City Freeze fight, another good example. So, yeah, it's a back and forth, you know. It's story or gameplay. Yeah, it's both, isn't it? The story is that you're being chased. You know, is that not the same with Resident Evil? I don't play like 90% of these games, so I don't have a reference. No, that's fine. That's fine. I understand. Resident Evil 2 is the fact that Mr. X is it Mr. X? Yeah, X gonna give it to you. That's how I always remember. Chasing you. That's gameplay, but it's story, and it serves the story to have him chasing you because it ups the tension of the story as a result. So it's one of those ones where it keeps going back and forth, and you can argue that gameplay gameplay is a set piece for it, you know. Good story creates space for good gameplay. That's true as well. The coolest thing you can do in a game, and again, I want to change this music because it's pissing me off every time it goes on that one. The coolest thing you can do is have gameplay that informs story and story that informs gameplay. Leads you to boss fights that are fun to play. Yeah. I agree. Right, okay. Do we have another topic lined up? Finn has been asking once or twice. No, we don't have another topic lined up, Finn. We are going to leave the first episode of Peralta's Take here. And we'll probably play something. But those watching on Twitch, stick around. Those watching on YouTube, this has been a little bit of a trial of something different. If you have liked this, share, like, subscribe, etc. Comment. I'll see you for more soon.